I'm going to ask you that. I'm saying, is this happening today? No, yeah. And then they can use that to fade down on, and then we'll start the interview. Okay. Well, here we are. I'm Julie Dash.
I'm Octavia Butler.
And we're here at the 40 Acres and a Mule. Do it again. I messed up. 40 Acres and a Microchip.
Oh, that's right. Oh.
Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Julie Dash.
I'm Octavia Butler.
And we're here at the 40 Acres and a Microchip conference. And I wonder if this is happening in the morning.
Well, considering the time difference, I can't imagine that we'd get it right, so let's give up on that one.
Yeah, too bad we couldn't be there. We're stuck here in L.A. You guys wouldn't send for us, but we're here for you.
It's not too bad. That's sad.
That's terrible. Hi, I'm Julie Dash.
I'm Octavia Butler.
And welcome everyone of the 40 Acres and a Microchip Film Conference. We're here to talk to Miss Octavia Butler about her work and
About my latest book, I think.
yes.
Okay.
Ready? Okay, Octavia Butler. What made you become a writer?
Oh, it's either a disease or an addiction. I'm not sure which. I've got a book of short stories coming out in the fall of this year. And I open it, I do introductions, one introduction and afterwards to each of the short stories. And one of the things I say at the beginning of the book is I hate writing short stories because it looks so easy and it turns out to be so difficult. And that's kind of how I began as a writer, writing short stories that I thought would be really easy and that turned out to be really difficult. And then trying to sell them. When I was about 13, I was beginning to try to sell things, sending them off to magazines and bothering editors and getting them back by return mail, which is a writer's rite of passage, but I didn't know it at the time, and it was really terrible for me. And it's like being told when you're a little older that your kid is ugly. It doesn't work out too well. Yeah. But I kept writing, and I wanted to write novels, and discovered that to be really the difficult thing, because novels are so big and intimidating. But wanting to be a writer just seemed to come naturally. As soon as I discovered there were such things as writers, I wanted to be one.
Okay, that's a good point to pause. And do cultural nuances play a part in your writing?
Couldn't help it, I don't think. I mean, I don't write about what I know in the usual sense. I don't write about my situation or you know, I don't, as one of my teachers in college once said, she said, why can't you write anything normal? I don't write about normal things that bore the heck out of me. I write about things that interest me very much. And if I have to research them, I do it. But, I don't know, I need to write about things that I care about more so than things that I already know all about. So, even though the culture can't help working its way in, I don't focus on it in the sense of, oh, I have this cultural message for you all. If I have it, it comes. It comes in.
What does it mean to write speculative fiction, or do you call it speculative fiction or science fiction?
I let the marketing people decide what to call it. I find it a really tiresome argument always to be arguing, is it fantasy? Is it science fiction? Is it speculative fiction? The only thing that I guess bothers me is I've noticed that if it's completely impossible fantasy, people are much more receptive to it. They're much happier to see all sorts of odd things that couldn't be than they are to see some sort of machine that's a little bit advanced and that could be, because that's science fiction, it's for kids. So in that sense, I'm bothered by it. I care about it, but as to what I call myself a writer.
Have you been influenced by other writers, artists, musicians in the culture or outside the culture?
I'm sure I have been. I tend to learn better by listening. So I do, for instance, music. I like sometimes having music on. If I'm upset, especially, it's good to have music on. I like having books on too, if they're old favorites, not new books that I've just discovered, audiobooks, but old favorites. I like having them on and just kind of as background noise. In that sense, I guess I'm more influenced than even sitting down and reading a book by the sounds of words, by the flow of words, that kind of thing. I pay more attention to that now, I think, than I did as a kid. But I've always read a lot, and I've always liked paying attention to how people said things, use of language. I can remember when I was working on my second novel, Mind of My Mind. Most of my novels are back in print now, I'm glad to say. At least in America they are. I have 8 novels in print, and I think that's the most I've had in print altogether. But I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I want to take a break now because I want to run and turn it. Okay, good. Okay. How do you see your role as a writer in shaping how you see the future? Can you talk about how you see the future?
Right now, I see a fairly grim future. My book, Parable of the Sower, I wrote that thinking about the future, thinking about the things that we're doing now and the kind of future we're buying for ourselves, if we're not careful. I usually add that, but it looks like we're not being very careful. And that's troubling. In Parable of the Sower, there is an even greater rich-poor gap than we've got now, for instance. And that does seem to be, the gap does seem to be widening. We get fewer and fewer middle-class people because their jobs have gone off to some low-wage country. And more, and more, the people there are being abused, because they don't get the protections that we insisted on. And there are more and more poor people, and there are the few rich people who are richer than ever. And so in the novel, there are people who work as hard as they can, but have to choose between living in a house and eating. And they live on the sidewalk. So LA and the area around LA looks like Calcutta is supposed to. I've not been to Calcutta, but I've heard about the sidewalk dwellers. Also there is the idea of what the world is going to be like when it is inherited by the children of today's drug addicts. My main character is the daughter of a drug addict, and she has a problem that is caused by her mother's drug taking. It's an unusual problem, but then that's the kind that tend to interest me. I want it to be medically possible, but not something that I've actually seen. Things biomedical, by the way, do catch my interest. Let's see, I wanted to look at the possibilities of global warming. Global warming is a kind of character in the book. Right now we've got sea level rising very slowly, but over the past couple of years, according to satellite measurements, it's starting to rise faster. Increased carbon dioxide over the past century or so. Very strange weather, storminess, odd weather, the kind of thing. We've got a lot of the things that we would be expecting if global warming were a fact and not just something still very questionable. But I think it's going to stay questionable until we can't ignore it or deny it any longer, because nobody really wants to do the kinds of things that we would have to do to live with it. And I have food prices going sky high because of global warming, because we can't grow what we used to grow in the places that are, that we've been growing it. And people really not doing very well. That's one of the reasons people can work as hard as they can and not be able to live in a house and eat. I've got the literacy problem. There is a character in Parable of the Sower who makes his way into a gang because he is the only literate person in that gang. Otherwise, they might just kill him and rob him. But because he can read and write, he's useful to the gang. I used to volunteer as literacy tutor with the Library Adult Reading Project here in Los Angeles. And it was amazing to see the number of people who've managed to make it to adulthood and go through the local schools and not learn to read and write. So I looked at the future with more of those people. Just in general, I look at the kind of future we're building. I mean, we're less and less willing to pay for the things that make civilization possible. And yet we imagine that somehow civilization will continue. And I don't see that it must.
Interesting, great. Interesting time to ask now, do you engage the new technology, like mobile telephones, beepers, computers, fax machines, motors? Basically, are you wired?
Not at all. No more so than people were in, I guess, 55 or thereabouts. No, the reason that there are several reasons that I don't. One of them is I'm saving to buy a house. But another is that I'm kind of set in my ways. And I have things like a VCR, just because it's convenient to have it, and I wanted to take some courses on television, and the best way was to tape them. I do expect to get a computer when I finish my current novel, Parable of the Talents. I've been promising I use a typewriter. I use a manual typewriter. You want to talk about dinosaurs. And I've been promising my editor, though, who is really very tired of piles of typed pages, that I would get a computer. And I figure since I'm going to get a computer, since I'm going to need to get something, it should be a computer and not just a fancy typewriter for word processing. Because, if I'm going to have to change, I might as well enjoy it, and I'm going to get something I can play with as well as just work with.
Do you see it kind of like a paradox that you don't engage in these new technologies, yet you...
I understand what you mean, but when you look at my writing, it's not the kind of advanced technology that you usually see in science fiction. I'm willing for my characters to have advances, but it's not what I'm focusing on. So that if, for instance, in Parable of the Talents, there has to be advancement because, for one thing, it takes place further in the future than Parable of the Sower. It's a continuation of Parable of the Sower. And for another, my character is going to have to interact with more different kinds of people, not just poor people who are out on the street. So she will be getting into, and also, she has this dream, the destiny of Earthseed, she says, and Earthseed is the belief system she creates. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars. And in order to make that dream seem something other than the wildest sort of fantasy, which is what it seems in Parable of the Sower, there has to be visible technological advancement for the character, for the society.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your relationship to your work. Do you want to take a break? Okay. So let's talk about your relationship to your work, the female characters in your novel or your work. The women who seem to be taken from their communities and replanted. Women are escaping and transforming and relinquishing the body and taking on new bodies, existing in spaces where race and gender no longer matter. Is there a spiritual dimension here or a direct?
I'm going to say something so pedestrian. I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. When I was a kid and read science fiction, the science fiction available for kids in the library that I went to was all boys' books. And you get tired of reading boys' books where the girls just kind of stand on the sideline and cheer the boys on. And I think one of the things I wanted to do when I began writing my own was be in the central place, be the one who's actually doing instead of the one who's standing off to one side watching. And I can remember being told when I was growing up, no, you can't do what your cousin is doing, he's a boy. And, you get a lot of that, and you more and more, you want to put yourself in there and see what you can do. And one of the things I've done with my female characters in particular is kind of build myself more of a personality that I can respect. If I was an only child, and my mother lost four before she had me, so she was very protective. Shortly after I was born, my father died, and I wasn't allowed to do much of anything that seemed like fun, like go to camp or just generally enjoy myself. And I was this huge, timid kid, very tiresome. I mean, I was so shy I couldn't stand myself. And I mean, I would know a lot more than I was ever able to appear to know. And I don't mean that I was brilliant or anything. I just mean that there were conversations that I was too shy to take part in. There were things I was too shy to do. And I was always sort of sitting back watching things happen. So I wanted to write about characters who were doing things. And in writing about them, I kind of helped to build more of myself. You know, find more of myself, that kind of thing. That's not all I was doing, but that was one of the first things I was doing. And for me personally, I think it was one of the most important things I was doing.
Well, that kind of answers the next question I had. How do you see your life, your work more about people rather than technology? And
well, not rather than, along with.
Along with.
Yeah, I kind of, whenever anybody brings up a division of any kind, I immediately think of, well, no, those aren't really two things necessarily.
Okay.
So whether it's brain, body, or I mean, mind, body, or you know, technology.
Right. Do you think we need to buy into all this new technology?
I think if it's useful, why not use it? Unless it's doing some terrible harm or something, why not? I don't have any objection to it. I sort of pick and choose. I use what I can use, and what isn't prohibiting me from doing something else that I really care about. For instance, with my writing, I've always wanted to earn a living writing, and I've been doing that since '76. And I could not have done that if I had bought into a lot of the new technologies that are around. I mean, my typewriter, I bought that typewriter about 15 years ago. Since I bought it for maybe $300, it's a big Adler, a really nice, heavy job. They used to steal my typewriters, so I got something that
Who's they?
my neighbors, I suspect, but that's not true. Somebody in the neighborhood, where I used to live, people, the teenage children began to get kind of obstreperous, you know. And I had 3 typewriters stolen. So I bought a huge typewriter that I thought nobody would want to run off with, or would be able to run off with. It weighs about 70 pounds. And I chained it to my desk with a big chain. So that's the way I work now still. But what I was going to say about the typewriter, since I bought it all those years ago, it hasn't cost me a penny. I clean it every now and then, put a new ribbon in it every now and then, little oil, works fine. And I can't think of any other thing that I could get away with that, any other way of writing that would be that cheap and that easy. So thanks to the typewriter, I'm going to be able to buy a house and do a few other things that I'd like to do.
Let's take a break for a second. You can have some water. Question from London. Is it possible for black people or people of color to formulate visions of the future that are both liberating and purposeful?
Of course. Of course. I mean, I don't even know what else to say about that. I mean, we better.
Okay, given the present situation of people of color around the world, shouldn't we be more concerned with dealing with the problems of the present rather than the future?
Well, if that's what we do, then we'll go on having some pretty nasty problems in the future. I had an acquaintance a while back whose daughter was not, she was at one of the schools that you really don't want your kid to go to. And the school they were trying to do some improving. And they were going to bring in language. This was an elementary school. They were going to bring in foreign language. And she was completely against it. She said, my kid doesn't speak English well enough to be learning some foreign language. Let her learn English first, then she can learn a foreign language. And I tried to explain to her that one of the things that really helped me learn more about English was learning a bit of Spanish. And I mean, it helped me to be aware of things that I would not have been aware of in English if I had only English to look at. And it was, to her, it was all nonsense. You know, her kid was supposed to learn the basics, and once she had the basics pounded into her, then she could learn something else if there was time. And I think that's the kind of thinking that is really doing a lot of harm to a lot of black people. You know, they're so fixed in the present that they can't think toward the future. Well, I have no idea what I said, so.
Okay, we're gonna start with something. I'm gonna paraphrase a cyber feminist, Sadie Plant, who writes in the UK, and she writes that machines and women have at least one thing in common: they are not men, and that silicon and women's liberation track each other's development. What are your thoughts about that statement?
I don't have any. It seems, gee, that's even more depressed than I usually get. We were talking about positive things before. I mean, I don't really, no, I have no response to that.
Let me cut for a second.
I probably won't be from now on.
No. Okay, we're back into these conversations on cyberspace, being online in these virtual worlds and all of that. And in cyberspace, one
You're
can...
asking a dinosaur.
Well, we'd like to know your opinion on it. But in cyberspace, one can surrender themselves to the technology and become whoever you want to be. You could gender change your age, and your political views, your race.
So far, you haven't given me anything that I don't do myself with my writing. So, no advantage yet.
Very good answer. What are the different things you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis? And how do you see these things changing in the future?
Do you mean in my writing? Do you mean like getting a computer, or what do you have in mind?
Just how you go about your day, and you're getting up and you're...
Okay, well, I'll tell you what I do. I'm not planning any big change, but you never know. I generally get up around between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, because I have discovered that mornings are my best time. I discovered this. This was kind of, you know how there's always a good side. If you're left alive and intact, there tends to be a good side somewhere to whatever happens to you. I used to get horrible little jobs. Every writer's gone through this, I suppose. And my jobs were, I tended to go to the blue collar because, A, you could earn more money, and B, you didn't have to pretend that you were enjoying yourself. And I mean, with the white collar jobs, you go in, you have to smile, you have to dress nicely, you have to pretend you're having a good time. Mm-hmm. You know, you go in with the blue collar, the guy next to you has a hangover, and he doesn't care what you think, and you don't care what he thinks. And if you've been up since 2 that morning, I used to get up at 2. And you're tired, and you're just slightly crazy from the hours you're keeping, it doesn't really matter that much as long as you do your work. I discovered that from doing all that I really did like the early morning hours, especially if I didn't have to get up after doing that stint and then going off to a job. So when I didn't have to do it anymore, I came from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. I came down to that and kept getting up. So I get up at around, like I said, around 3, and I write, I read. I do a little bit of reading just to wake up. Sit there and drink a cup of coffee, do a little bit of reading. And then I write and do most of my creative work early in the morning. And then if I'm being a good person that day, I do a 4-mile walk in the later morning. And I don't like summer because the later morning comes, the light comes too quickly, and I feel that I should be out walking. I like to walk just around dawn. But anyway, I do my walk if I'm being a good person. If I'm being a bad person, I sit and go on writing until around 9 and get up and have breakfast. And I generally take a nap. That's one of the things that I could never do when I was working for other people, so I was just dead very early in the day. But I'll take about an hour nap and put a book tape on and snooze. And then I get up, and it depends on what kind of things I have to do that day. If I have to go off to the library to do some research, or if I have to go out and do something business-wise, then I'll do that. If I don't, then I'll do some more writing or some research. It's a better time. The afternoon is better for research because I'm generally not very creative, but I can use what I'm pulling out of the research to suggest ideas. For instance, that's what I'm good at in the afternoon.
What do you see yourself doing in the future?
Better. Really, I would love, for instance, to have a bestseller. I've never had one. That would be nice. I would like to. I've got a list of places that I would like to visit. None of them are the usual. I've discovered that I don't really like visiting cities. I have to a lot, but on my own, I think I like visiting the natural places. Antarctica is on my list. Alaska is on my list. This is not because I love cold places. It's because I've already gone some of the warm ones. I'd like to visit places like New Guinea, places that are completely different from anything that I'm used to. So that's definitely on my list. There are some novels that I want to write. Excuse me. Just generally, I would like to do more of what I've been doing, only I'd like to do it better.
Okay. And yes, as far as I'm concerned, you've had this. And as a long-standing author, do you feel excluded or ghettoized from mainstream dialogue about black women writers? Well, for instance, when they're doing anthologies.
I have a strange problem. It's not. It's on the one hand a good thing. Here's that the usual problem again. It's a good thing that I have three audiences. I have the science fiction audience, I have the black audience, and I have the feminist audience. And I'm glad of all three of them. And when I travel, I mean, I'm really made aware that I do have these three audiences. But on the other hand, some people see that as a negative. For instance, a company called Juneteenth was going to do a series of audiobooks. Really, they were going to be not complete books, but parts of books or condensed books or whatever. And they were going to do a couple of mine, but apparently their financing fell through, and they had to choose other books because their funder felt that there wasn't really that much interest in science fiction among black people. So apparently here was somebody who didn't see me as a person with a lot of audiences, but a person with one audience that they saw as much narrower than it actually is.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about how you feel about black people in science fiction?
Okay, I'll say
about what you know, rather.
Okay. Well, as far as fandom is concerned, they're right. I mean, you can go to science fiction conventions and see very few black fans. For one thing, very few black people know about fandom. I never did when I was a kid interested in science fiction. I went to my first science fiction convention when I was 23, and I didn't know what it was about at all. I mean, I went and I found it a little strange, and I looked around and decided that I wasn't very happy and didn't go to another one for a long time. Not because anyone did anything to me, but just because I had no idea what it was about, and no one told me.
So what, did you see any other people of color there? One? No.
Yeah, this was before I had anything published. And I saw this one black man, and I went over to him and I said, "Hi, are you a writer?" And he said, "No, are you?" And I was too embarrassed to admit that I was this writer with tons of rejection slips and no published work, so I said no, and we both wandered off to find somebody more important. So In fandom, there are more black fans now, but there's still not that many. But in reading science fiction, I mean, you could see people on buses reading science fiction. I still ride buses. I don't drive either. But, you know, when I speak at bookstores, black bookstores, I get a good crowd. Even when I'm speaking at feminist or science fiction bookstores, a lot of black people will come in. Um, I think that probably I get more scorned by reviewers and critics for writing science fiction than I do for being black or being female, because so many people tend to think that science fiction is